Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you all. Welcome to Primetime Convenient Library. The mission of Primetime Convenient Library is to encourage lifelong learning beyond the classroom for the entire Bethel community, and is a collaboration between the library and many offices on campus. On Tuesday, March 6th, we will celebrate the Faculty Excellence Award winner for teaching, Dr. Nancy Brule. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, correctly for French.
Brule.
So I appreciate it.
Okay. Of communication studies as she presents, and then I fell off the stool I shouldn't have been standing on in the first place. Sounds interesting. Today we welcome Jessica Saman, Alex Calca, and Ruth Nelson as they share a talk about teaching presentation entitled Increasing All Voices in the College Classroom, In-Class Strategies for Including English Language Learners. Let's welcome this one.
We want this to be a very relaxed discussion, so feel free to just share thoughts and ideas. And we're actually going to start with what are some of the issues encountered when working with multilingual students, whether in a teaching situation or a tutoring situation. What are some of these issues that you've encountered? Because we do hope to do more. We talked about teaching to go well today, and continue this strand. We'll keep trying to.
If you can't think of anything top of your head, turn to your neighbor for a second. Chat with the neighbor. When we talk about English language learners in the classroom, what comes to mind, and what are some of the things that you would like to do differently? Some situations you'd like to address. So think about those kinds of things. Is it, do you need examples? Or is the question clear?
The speeded nature of the information, would that be one? The speeded nature of the information?
Speed and nature or speed and nature?
The speeded nature.
For class lecture, you mean?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Do you ever balance of trying to, how much do I cover, but how fast, how quickly I can read?
An issue we've run into is some of the policies that we have in place because we want to kind of push native English speakers in terms of note-taking, things like that. Creates a problem when the student is coming from a different language background. Those same policies which are meant to encourage other students are become barriers to those, like not providing comments.
Okay, and not seeing it in print. With the issue of skipping class.
Right.
Sometimes just lack of academic vocabulary within that discipline.
Struggling with academic reading, both types of vocabulary, syntax, and quantity.
Another one is interpreting meaning. So if I'm coming from a different language background, I might perceive a word differently or process it differently than the way it's being presented. So interpreting meaning of language.
Cultural meanings are different.
Yeah, or just I just have a different understanding of what that word means in a different context.
I think a cultural understanding of the relationship between a faculty member and a student, they can be very different depending on where you come from.
And that can relate to the different cultural background of the student and how they perceive power and being intimidated to ask some questions.
At times, lack of confidence on the part of a second language learner in communicating orally, especially in a larger group situation.
Group presentation, or even by themselves giving a behavioral presentation. Like just as amazing that how powerful that confidence factor is. Okay, all right. Well, I'm just going to talk, I really mean only 2 or 3 minutes about the theoretical overview of BICS and CALP You guys maybe are very familiar with these terms. If you look at the handout, this is the original, a couple decades ago, Cummins put together a nice model called the language interdependence theory. And language 1, language 2, you know, as the kind of the mountains here, referring to the person's individual native language and the language that they have acquired. They're in the process of acquiring. At the top, and that's why there's a line drawn through the middle of it, is the top is more the surface language, the conversational English, what we call basic interpersonal communication skills, okay? And this is develops in 2 to 3 years. There's a lot of vocabulary, face-to-face communication, daily activities, that kind of language use. But then the deeper structures of language refer to the foundations of thought, really. It's a qualitatively different thing to be able to read a textbook chapter and cognitively take out the meaning from that and to play around with that meaning. It's being able to have semantic mapping going on and playing around with those ideas and so forth. Here is Byron, a psychologist. He says, most argue CALP is just this qualitatively different thing. They think fixed, then they immediately will move into this CALP level and being able to synthesize and evaluate material. But it's really beyond the accumulation of individual words. The student's able to transcend immediate experience by creating a semantic map that allows the student to transform information into an entirely new ideas. And CALP has 2 levels of language acquisition, intermediate fluency, and then fluency. And some of the things that need to occur in the classroom at that intermediate fluent level incur a lot of visuals. So whether that means hands-on science activities, making models, maps, charts, working with manipulatives, talking through written texts, discussing the ideas and the main ideas from a reading, illustrations, visuals. Those are the types of learning activities that help them grasp onto these more abstract ideas. And of course, another couple of factors to think about, and you're probably well aware of this, is that a student's level of competence in their first language determines a lot of their competence in their second language. So if they've achieved CALP in that first language, then it's a much easier jump for them to get there. But thinking about students who immigrate to the United States, who came from a place like refugee camps, who don't have that formal education in that first language, it's a much larger jump for them than to get to those higher levels of CALP. All right, but that's way too theoretical, but at least gives you a context for understanding where your students might be at. They might be at that level 4 or level 5 in CALP, and still not quite at the top fluent level, and thinking about how they can master and do activities in their class. So Jess is going to share more about just practical strategies. What are the barriers you run into the classroom? You guys have a great list. We'll hit upon some of those, and then the future talks will be more in that regard.
One of the great things about the practices that we have, and we've broken it up into 4 different issues that we're really seeing in the classroom, is that these are going to be strategies that will truthfully benefit every student in the classroom. One of the things that we know about the students that we encounter is that we're not always sure about what their different abilities are within a variety of different contexts. And so one of the great things is that these will be things that will hopefully benefit everybody. The other thing that becomes really important with this is that it stresses both the academic and also the interpersonal relationships with the students. And so this becomes really key because one of the things that I find, part of my role here at Bethel is I actually work one-on-one tutoring with a lot of our English language learners. Last semester, I think I worked with around 15 different students from all of the different departments on campus. And it became very, very clear to me that it wasn't just an academic struggle that many of these students were facing, but it was also the interpersonal struggle. There was a study that was done at MSU Mankato, and they interviewed both exchange students as well as English language learners. And their data found that 99% of these students left campus without saying that they had a good friend. And that was defined as somebody that they could call on a regular basis or somebody that they could hang out with. This number brings me to tears. This is really difficult to try and comprehend. And while that doesn't just encompass the English language learners, I think it is important to think about what we need to be doing for these students, both on an academic and also on an interpersonal level. Anybody who's studied intercultural communication or anybody who has traveled abroad at some point in time has made one of those major errors where you've made a mistake within that culture, you've done something you shouldn't have, or maybe you've offended, you've interrupted conversation. And so as I talk through some of the strategies that we came up with to try and give you guys something really tangible today, I want to focus on both the academic strategy as well as how this is going to benefit the student interpersonally. So if you want to refer to your handout, I'm not going to repeat everything verbatim. I know that you can all look at it yourself, but I do want to use this as the starting point for some of these different ideas. And Ruth and Alex will jump in. If somebody has an example, please feel free to interrupt me. I teach speech, so it's okay if you interrupt me. I can recover from any sort of question that you may ask. Just as a clarification. At least I hope I can. I'll ask my department to leave. No. One of the first areas that I find that students really struggle a lot with is group work. And this is both in class and outside of class. One example that I can give you that I experienced last semester working with a student here on campus was that there's a struggle when they're given the option to do group projects or individual work for major end of the semester projects. Partially because with some of our students that are coming into campus, they don't necessarily have a lot of relationships with the other students. We bring in students sometimes for just a semester from other campuses. A lot of times we're finding that our ELL learners are transferring to Bethel after 1 or 2 years at a community college, so they haven't had those freshman basis of friendships. Oftentimes their home situations are a little bit different. I'm working with people who have families, I'm single parents, things like that. And so because not all of our students have that traditional experience, this is also having some of that impact on that relationship building. One of the things that we find with group work is that students are struggling then with trying to find even group members. Within the classroom, if you are giving comments such as break into groups, oftentimes students are not quite sure how to initiate that experience to build those groups. I have seen in my own classes where I have not forced groups on students. I've seen students get left out and sit there because they're not quite sure. They don't necessarily have that ability to interject and ask. With group projects, if they have the option to do an individual project or a group project for the end of the semester, I'm finding that students are sometimes coming to me and saying, I don't even know where to find a group, how to ask for a group. And so students that would love to have this interaction experience, which is going to build skills for them and the students that they work with, aren't getting that option to have that group experience. And so just making sure that we're very intentional about that. With that being said, we obviously know that there's a variety of different ways that we can facilitate that within the classroom. One of the things that I always try and do is mix up the groups just so that the students get different experiences. I know I've had students that have requested to work with, like my English language learners that have actually requested to work with certain students or different groups of students just to try and really facilitate that learning aspect that they can get from those different groups that they're interacting with. This is going to be community building. The more familiar faces that these students start to see on campus, the more that we're going to help to build those friendships and also just to really build that support system. One of the things that I always say in class is make sure you've got the phone number of a student in case you have a question and you can't get a hold of me or you don't want to ask me. And so really helping these students build and facilitate some of those friendships and those relationships can become really important. A second one, and this I see quite often with students, is going to be difficulty understanding assignment descriptions and explanations. And this can be caused from a variety of different reasons. Everything from students not understanding the language, not understanding the slang, not understanding the American academic situation and exactly what that entails. I believe that came up as one of the examples that students struggle with. I have students who come to me that have never heard of APA or an outlining. They have no idea what a literature review is. And so one of the things that we need to really make sure is that we're helping students, making sure that we can have dialogues with them, really making sure that they even know what sorts of questions to ask a professor. So many times I have students that come in and work with me, and we sit down with this sheet of paper that has an assignment description on it, and they tell me that they don't even know where to start. And part of it's because they've never had to write a paper of this type. It's unique to the major that they're in. Oftentimes you have papers within different situations that are specific to that class or to that setup that you want. I find that oftentimes the students are struggling with knowing where to start, but they can't go to the professor because they don't always know what types of questions to even ask. And along with that, there's that fear of looking incompetent. One of the last things that I find that DLL students want is to look like they're incompetent or like they can't achieve something within the classroom. And so definitely we want to make sure that anything that we can do with assignments. One of the things that I encourage, and this is good for all students, if you could have examples of really good papers that they can follow, even if it's just an outline structure so they know exactly what's expected, that also helps me out when they come and work with me, because then I can make sure that we're placing things in the right situations, things like that. Not only making sure that you provide time to ask questions in class so that the student can hear everything, but even providing checkpoints. If you've got a major paper coming up in the class, doing something as simple as at the end of the class, taking 5 minutes and telling students to, write down what your sticky point is, or what is it that you're struggling with on this paper. Collect it. You can read by the responses that they give if there's going to be understanding or misunderstanding with that paper. And then that can help give some of that one-on-one support. The other thing with that one also is just being aware of cultural bias. I've had students that have come in and asked me questions about what this means. Something that's, I can't think of an example right now, but something that's just very traditional. We don't even think twice about in American culture, and they might not understand. Do you have an example for me?
I think one of the economics class assignments, one of the finance assignments was a mortgage. There's a problem with a mortgage. In some cultures, you don't do mortgages. You borrow money from friends or relatives. So the whole concept of mortgage, and what would be a good mortgage or a bad mortgage, was just lost on the student. And they can't think, okay, what's going on? And I've studied about mortgages in my class, but it's not a natural part of life. So that could be true.
Yeah, I had an example of a student, not with Bethel, but a different class that I taught. They didn't understand the concept of a nursing home, something that we take so for granted in our culture. And we had an entire class discussion about the nursing home system in America and what this meant. And I mean, I had a group of 12 students from a variety of different places, and they could not comprehend this idea that we would put our parents in a nursing home and not keep them within our families. And so even to try and get that message across was really difficult.
No, you just answered my question. Was it an unusual concept or uncommon concept to them because there just weren't any nursing homes, or is because they take care of their elderly themselves? That's what I was getting at.
Yeah, it was because of the taking care of the elderly. And I know even with some of the students I've worked with here, they talked about, entire families living together, which is something that, is not very common for us. So while we might think that that's a practice that isn't happening here, definitely, and a lot of our ELL students are dealing with that. Having to take care of ailing grandparents and things like that, which creates lots of extra stress. A third one, and I'll probably talk about these last two a little bit together, lecture and assignment examples. One of the things that I find students really struggle with is really trying to understand a lot of what's happening within the classroom, and they're missing out on notes and whatnot because of that. One of the reasons, obviously, is because they have to translate that information. Academic language does not always translate very easy. I find myself a lot of times spending the first few minutes with students just defining words. And so this can be true for any student that is just struggling with accepting some of that academic language. One of the fallbacks that I find that these students often go to then is the dictionary, which is problematic because academic language does not come from the dictionary. And so a lot of times the working definitions that these students are finding, if they've got translators or anything like that, isn't even necessarily going to be the definition that you are hoping that they use within the classroom. And so this can create that issue. What can we do? And this kind of pulls off of that idea that Sam talked about. Any sort of visual or illustrations that can be provided in the classroom. while you might not want to put PowerPoints up, because I know I was not always a fan of PowerPoint until I really started working with ELL students, but I have found that just having that word and that definition, even putting that PowerPoint online the night before so that they can print it off and be able to not have to both write down the notes in my words, but just to have to focus on one or the other. So many times, as if you watch students in the class, they start to write something, and the second that they get caught, they either set their pencil down or they stop writing their notes. And so this becomes really problematic if they don't have that information. Academic reading is difficult in a different language, or in a second language. So, you know, trying to put all of these pieces together can be really difficult. Even creating, we give the example here of a glossary on Google so that students can try and access information.
What if we actively don't want to provide PowerPoints for most of our students, but would like to for these students? Is there, because we really want to help students learn to take notes.
Right.
And take notes in a situation where they're listening to a lecture, maybe looking at a PowerPoint, but we don't want to provide them that. But we would be willing to help a student do that. How does that work?
I think as long as you're willing to work with that student and give them the support that they need, whether that's talking through that PowerPoint with them, or you know, if there's some sort of brief handout, even sitting down and teaching them how to take notes, that could be something that they have never experienced.
I guess my question is it possible to have a system where you could provide them to these particular students, but not to all students? Or is that a problem?
I think it's the Bob Kistler question. I know with Blackboard, you could make content available with a password, so only people who had a password could access that content. And I haven't seen that in Moodle.
I'm asking more like, is that okay?
I think it is okay.
It doesn't feel okay to me.
It doesn't?
Only because I think about the other group of students. That I think it'd be great for the ELL students, but when I
Maybe
start
we make
thinking about
accommodation.
providing that type of resource clearly for only part of the class, I mean, one option would be getting it to you all. And then the students can come to you. They're coming for help, and then having it available, and technically anybody then could come for help through the Ask Office.
I think one of your issues is providing PowerPoints and then they don't have to take notes, right? You want them to take notes in class. And so one option that I've used, it's a lot of work on your end, is to modify your PowerPoints so that so there's some missing information. And then they can use those PowerPoints if they download them early. They can use them in class and fill in the information during your lecture because they know what to look for. So.
And the part of the problem is we're working with 8 to 10 different people teaching, trying to coordinate that, and our PowerPoints aren't the notes, but what we're trying to avoid are students presuming that those are. That's a separate.
Yeah, and students not coming to class because they already got the PowerPoint, so why do they need to bother coming to class?
Or they're coming, but they're not realizing that this is a teaching aid and not the notes. That's different.
And I think this shows just how sticky of a question that is, because I know that's the one that we deal with on the ELL task force is where that line of support is. Because technically it's not like they have any sort of legal accommodations that can need to be offered. And so what we're trying to do is find ways to really improve student success. So
we see it as having a second language is such a benefit, a value-added thing. We don't want any connection with it as a disability, right? So it's not an accommodation. We never use that term. And why we say modification in our table. Jay?
I'll just throw in one thing real fast, too. This is even more work for the instructor, but if you can do narrated PowerPoints, they are really, really nice for second language learners because they can replay them multiple times, and they're hearing what you have to say. They've got text in front of them. It's a lot of work to make them up front, but once you have them, you have them. And they're amazing because students can replay.
I think based on the email you sent earlier about the inverted classroom, if you have an inverted classroom, you don't have that problem because everyone has the PowerPoint, narrated PowerPoint outside of class anyway. So if your class time isn't a lecture, then you have a whole different setup. I think in classic CWC it's very difficult to do it that way because you have to have that lecture time, that's shared information gathering kind of thing. So it's a little different setup, but that's one of the solutions or one of the ways you can get around that PowerPoint stickiness. Is if you don't do the PowerPoint in class anyway, then you don't have a problem with that.
One of the other things also, if that's something, if you don't have those PowerPoints or the support, basically it's just a matter of trying to figure out how you can get this information to students in a multiple different ways. This could be as simple as creating, a short little video clip that you can upload that also helps to explain the concepts or provides an example. This could be creating, quick little voice recordings that you can upload on Moodle. While not every student is going to use that benefit, just having an extra resource for the students, I find it so important. So many times they come to me and I'm like, we talk about this in class, and students can't make heads or tails of it, especially when it's in, when professors are using a lot of that academic language, because it just becomes a struggle to try and figure out those things. So, do we have the perfect answer yet? No, I think that's something that we're working on, but really just trying to figure out. We've had a statistic, asking for the back, but what was it, the 30%?
Yeah, just that our classrooms are increasingly becoming more diverse, and in K-12 systems, 30% of classrooms, and then by 2015, the number is just projected to grow and grow. So this is something, we're going to see that demographic in the college classroom as well.
I think the thing that's tricky for a lot of instructors is that when we talk with our second language learners, we speak with them, and because they have the BICS, the conversational capability, we assume that they have the CALPs, the academic part. And then when we teach, we're not cognizant of the fact that much of the vocab that we're using, they really don't get, because they've got the conversational piece, but not the academic piece. And I think it's true of a lot more of our students than we realize. Much of the vocab we use, we know it. I mean, we live in it, and we assume they get it, but they don't. So I think a really key principle is to figure out before a lecture, what are the words that students must absolutely know in order to understand how this whole lecture is going to unfold. And then for all students, spend maybe a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes identifying those key words, that are going to unlock the meaning to the lecture that's about to follow. It really benefits everybody, like you guys were saying, not just the ELLs, but in particular the ELLs. Because often there can be 1 or 2 key words. If you don't know what those mean, you are literally lost. You're trying to figure out the whole time what's going on. So us taking that second to figure out what are those words, and then directly identifying them.
Chuck, with this, you're using the word vocab instead of vocabulary. Yep. If you're an English language learner, it's like, I don't know that word. They know vocabulary, but they don't know vocab.
Good example with that one. If you're trying to come up with what the word is for that green stuff that we use to buy things, what do you call that? Do you use something base or money?
Currency.
Bucks, change, things like that. The technical definition is currency. And I had a student that came to me that was, had only been in America for about a month and could not figure out what anything other than the word currency was. And this was such a struggle because, literally, if we were to list all of the slang terms, the students usually come up with 8 or 9 different ways that they refer to just that physical money. And so we catch ourselves. I catch myself doing it all the time in class. Just the words that I use and how difficult it is. Those two possibilities. The last area that I want to talk about then before we break into discussion and questions is going to be full class discussions. And this is going to be whether it incorporates both lecture or not. One of the biggest issues that I find with the ELL learners is that there's a difficulty with if they're being asked questions on the spot. The common practice that we see is if you ask a student for a question, you should wait about 7 to 10 seconds for a response. For a student who speaks English as a second language, this should increase to up to 20 seconds because of the having to interpret it, come up with a response, and then be able to share that information. With a lot of the students that I've worked with, when they've had struggles in class, I ask them, tell me about the thought process. You receive a statement from your teacher, what do you do? Well, they take it, they interpret it to their native language, they come up with their answer in their native language, and then they have to translate back to English. And so this becomes a very long, multi-step process. And so even trying to help students learn how to go through that process and making sure that we give that information. In some research that I have done, one of the things that I found was that it was the in-class that really did stress out these students. One of the things that I had asked them about was the participation in the classroom, and just to give you a couple comments about what they responded with. I had a student who said, I do not know when to raise my hand. I never used to be allowed to ask questions in class. And this was looking at a previous educational experience that didn't happen in that traditional American classroom. I had another student who explained about how each class is different, so they just said that they gave up even participating in class because it was such a frustrating experience. I had a student who had lost points in class because they weren't participating and no participation points. And the student actually said, I must not talk enough to count. These are the exact words of the student. And if that just breaks my heart. We didn't necessarily understand what that idea of participation meant because the previous education experience they had been very different. I had another student who said that because his stories took so long to talk or to say that he didn't know how to even share his information in class. He came from a background where they were very much storytellers, and so his responses were typically wrong and felt like he was not getting that support. I had one student she was a young woman who had never spoken up in a classroom before, and we actually practiced for her to answer one of my questions. She came and sat with me about a week beforehand. I told her what the question in my lecture would be, and I asked the question, and I waited because I could see in her face the struggle if she should participate or not. Finally, I saw her hand go up. It was a yes or no question, but for this student, had never had that experience, not understanding necessarily some of those questions about even how to interact within that college classroom, different situations like that. Those environments can be very, very intimidating. Also, one of the things, and this is what I'm very careful to comment on, even providing the feedback to that verbal response. If the answer is wrong, you obviously can't say, oh, great answer, and move on, but really making sure if you're finally getting that voice to participate and it isn't correct, how are you going to make sure that you don't silence it for the rest of the classroom? And so really just handling the situations in a very, very careful way. And with that full class discussion, one of the easiest ways, and this is a strategy that we hear all the time, is even prepping students for an activity like Think, Pair, Share. Have them come up with that response, share it with another student in the classroom, and then offer it out to the full classroom. This allows the student to think through those thoughts, not just in their head, but to also say them out loud. Anybody who's given a presentation before knows that just because you think about it doesn't mean it's going to come out well when you're actually giving that presentation. So making sure that you're taking that.
One of the strategies, a student in my class, a multilingual learner, we were talking about teenage pregnancy, contributing factors, and developmental models, how it can appearance, intervene and change some of the statistics as we see the teen pregnancy rates rise. And she came to me that day after class. She said, I really have a lot to share about Nigerian culture and how they shun these women and the whole family and just all these interesting cultural facts. And she goes, can I share that in the class? And I was like, yeah. She goes, I need to write it down and I need to prepare it. And I said, that's great, And so for her, when we hit adolescence and those will come up again, she's preparing ahead to do that, to share that. So if there's ways we can increase their voices, they benefit the whole class. And it was moving too quickly and not using some of these good strategies so that she felt like she could say it right then and there in the classroom. And then hanging around after class, I think, is a big thing for these students. I find that they talk with me. I don't do any appointments after my classes now because that's when the questions come. Even if it's the third or fourth time going over an assignment or like she shared about this information she wanted to share with the whole class.
We've got about 10 minutes or so left, so we'd just like to open it up to discussion, questions, experiences that you can contribute to the group.
This is curiosity as a language speaker. You've talked several times about the student translating the question. And most of us who are speaking another language, you reach a point where you're not doing that anymore. And is that the level where most of our students are? Are they either because of the challenge of academic learning reverting back to a lower level to that translation mode?
I don't think they're to that level because with the students that I'm working with, a lot of times I'll ask them what they speak in their homes. And they're using English on campus, but in most other areas of their life, they're using their first language.
I don't think necessarily means they're translating.
It really depends on what student. I think our presentation today is really focused on a lot of international students or recent immigrant students. We also have a lot of lifelong immigrants who've grown up in the U.S. and that's a different population. Those students would not be translating necessarily. I think it's if anything, it's translating from BICS English to CALP English and back and forth. So this person said that in fancy words, what does that mean in real words? And then how do I say that by getting it to sound smart in fancy words?
Yeah.
I think that translation is more happening rather than
Right.
like you don't have an English to Hmong translation, but you have conversational English to academic English
Yeah, what does that
translation.
really mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Would be, I think for our student population, we have both immigrant students and international students, so we have a variety of moving targets.
You talked a little bit about the non-academic issues and concerns that some of these students have. How are those addressed at
At Bethel, I think it's a little bit of a, I don't know if there's anything that's being addressed specifically at Bethel, like wide, I guess. I think one of the issues is that for a lot of these students, they are coming because they're transferring from community colleges and things like that. They're not having that beginning friendship base with students, and so I know a lot of times I've asked, is there a classmate you can speak with, and the answer is typically no. And so that's from what I'm getting from the students, there's not a lot of that interpersonal interaction.
There are a couple things.
Yeah, Edwina's office, I mean, she's done some good work in trying to connect with students. The problem is the students don't have a lot of time to be a part of those activities. Their parents or, their children, they need to get home by a certain time. So,
Yeah, I think a lot of the on-campus efforts are directed at traditional students who live on campus. Some of the students organize a transfer student club for a while. So they are student-led clubs. They are at Edwina's office having mentorship relationships. Those are very convenient for on-campus traditional age students. They're not convenient for our Hmong students who live at home and bring their parents or grandparents to the hospital on a weekly basis. They're not convenient for our Nigerian students with families and they're working and they're raising a family at the same time. They're not convenient for all these other populations. So we don't have a lot for those other populations, and I think part of that is you create a program that people then will not attend, and you haven't really met your goal. So how can we create, even all the things we talked about today, all the strategies, all of these involve extra work on the student's part. How much extra time can a student spend on each class? How much is reasonable to expect people to spend on each class? The rule is 2 hours of homework for every hour of class. Can we expect a student to spend 3 hours at home for every hour in class? How about 4 hours at home for every hour? I mean, it becomes insane even with 12 credits. If most of our students are working, whether they're native speakers or not. So we want to provide that support, make it available. We want to balance that with having expectations of students doing all the work. We're going to meet them halfway, I would say.
And also, Edwina's not here anymore.
I know.
And her
Yeah.
replacement's not coming in until June.
right.
As someone who's a former international student, I actually am. I went through those stages, and I still am. I'm a doctoral international student, basically. And the time it takes me and the effort, number one, to say something in my classes, to bring and construct coherent, intelligent question or response to the audience is huge, along just the writing piece. For example, writing for me, a good academic piece of work takes me, if my classmates it takes them 2 hours, it takes me 7 hours. And it's not until really instructors realize that it's not that we slack off, but it just takes huge amounts of time, of prep time to do it. And we would like sometimes to engage at the same level, but there's something it's hard, because we know what's expected of us at the same time. And it is very hard.
That time commitment alone, and you don't just have one viewer, you've got 2 people.
I think a big part of that too is the face saving, saving face. And how much do you want to risk by participating? And even in a small group discussion, do you want to say something and have your classmates think you're stupid? No, you don't. And so, especially some cultures that put a lot of emphasis on saving face, and so Some students may not want to even bother sharing just because it's just too much of a risk. You know, I think our culture is more informal. If you say something stupid to your professor, you'll recover. You'll be embarrassed for a week and you'll recover. Some students would not recover for months, whenever. I think there's a cultural elements to that participation piece.
Well, and I think the other implication of that is saving is when they actually come to talk to us as professors. I know I had an ELL student last semester, and it was a student that was also working with Jessica. And I think that's part of the reason that she was more willing to come to me was because there was already a point of contact there. But a lot of times those students won't even come because they're afraid, well, you know, you're not going to think that I'm a very good student. And so it becomes then a burden on us to maybe make that first move to say, you know, what is it that you need in terms of helping you to get through the class?
Absolutely. I've sat down with many students and just helped them construct the question to go ask the professor so that they can get the help that they need. The other issue that I noticed with that, and while the policy with working with students, you know, we keep our doors open, I find that a lot of my PLL students will come in and shut the door right away. And I think there's a couple reasons behind that. One is just the potential of the embarrassment. Maybe they don't want to hear everybody asking those questions. The second reason is just because sometimes that noise in the background can make it more difficult to process that information. So even thinking about the location that's happening is making sure that if there's lots of noise around, I mean, that can be a distraction for anyone. There's noise all the time by where I'm at. And, you know, it's hard to focus sometimes on the cause of that noise. But the whole point is really taking into consideration even that situation. It needs to feel safe. It needs to feel supportive, and it needs to. That's going to be what it takes to make sure that that student is on the right track and that they are able to ask for that help. We know with any student that first shutdown oftentimes makes it difficult to ever ask those questions or to go for that support again. So we need to make sure that we're bringing in that support for the start to build something.
Open and shut doors is cultural too.
Yes. So very much so. Yeah, the first couple times I worked with students one-on-one, the door went shut. I'm like, oh, that's not okay. And, but it became very clear to me that that was what they were wishing for, and so we needed to try and negotiate that. So I believe we're out of time now. So thank you all very much for coming and listening to our presentation. If you have any questions,